welcome back to my channel. If you hadn't guessed already, we'll be talking about Oncidium orchids today and the Oncidium Alliance. It's a huge topic, so I'm probably going to have to split this into a few different videos so you don't have to listen to my voice for like an hour. But here are all my Oncidium orchids. I thought it would be fun to place them all on this table, and it looks kind of cool. Completely impractical, especially for showing them to you, but anyway, here they are. Clearly I love them. Like, they're actually right up there as probably my favorite type of orchid. They are super easy to grow. They're very forgiving. They're great for the beginner. They're not ridiculously expensive, and also the variety in the size of plant and flower is incredible. Like the colors, the size of the flower, the patternings of the flowers, the fragrance, the sizes, everything about them is very, very appealing. So I love them. But what I want to talk to you about is the taxonomy and the classification of them, because it is incredibly confusing, and the changes have impacted how we sort of try and find out the ancestry of our orchid and try and relate that back to the care, because in a lot of ways they've made it more difficult for us to do that. But you know, it's all an advent of DNA testing, and you know, some of it does make sense, some of it doesn't, but it is what it is. So I'm going to try and help you understand it a little bit. But we're not going to concentrate on that in this video. For this video, I want to show you my Oncidium collection, and I want to talk to you about how I care for my Oncidiums, and you know, the little nuances in different genera have some different care requirements, so I just want to talk about how I cater for them a little bit as well. Okay guys, so first up I'm going to show you my Oncidium Alliance orchids that are from single genera as opposed to the intergenerics. So for the beginners out there, classification of orchids is a little bit complicated until you get to know it. There are basically species orchids, so they are the orchids that are found in nature, but man has hybridized different species and hybridized the hybridized orchids to create different plants, different flowers. So within the Oncidium Alliance there are lots and lots of hybrids which trace back to different ancestors. And so within the Oncidium Alliance, as I mentioned, there's many different genera. There's the Oncidium genus itself, but there's also Brassia, Gomisa, Cochleoda, Odontoglossum, there's Miltonia, Miltoniopsis, and they can all be interbred to create intergeneric orchids. And these orchids have qualities from all their parents. But what I mean by single genera is these orchids are all from the Oncidium genus. So even though they're hybrids, their lineage can be traced back to purely Oncidium genus species orchids. Okay guys, so first up I got these two little cuties, and they are mini Oncidiums, so they're not going to get a whole lot bigger than this. In fact, not much bigger at all. This one has actually flowered already, so it's flowering size, but they will get bushier. And the great thing about these are actually that they're also fragrant. They've got super cute flowers, very cute colors usually, and they're fragrant. So yes, this is Oncidium Siku Marguerite Chiansi Dragon. It's not flowered before. You can see it's got 1, 2 new growths. So the second one there. And I reckon it's pretty close to flowering size, so maybe these new growths will mature and form some flowers. This is Oncidium Gold Dust, which had its first flowering not too long ago, and I'll put some pictures of orchids flowers. If they have flowered, I'll use mine, but otherwise I'll use ones from the internet that haven't flowered for me before. You can see the old flower spike there, and a new growth there. So this guy smelt quite similar to the Oncidium Twinkle. Okay, so while we're talking about him, I might as well show him to you as well. But this is my Oncidium Twinkle. I call him Mr. Twinkle. The variety is Fragrant Fantasy, but it also comes in different colours, pink, red. So there's quite a few varieties out there. This is an extremely easy orchid to grow. It stays very compact and flowers from a small size, and you can see as the orchid grows it produces lots of bloom spikes. Now the thing about the Oncidium Twinkle is that the bloom spikes take forever to form, so you have to be patient. From the moment I saw the first spike to the moment I saw the first bloom was literally 6 months. That's a long time, but once it starts to flower, the bloom spikes can still branch out. You can see that one's branching out. This one here is still developing. So the blooms themselves last for not an incredibly long time, about maybe 3 to 4 weeks. But as old blooms fall, you know, they're sort of opening up and budding new ones at different times. So the overall blooming lasts for a little while, and because you can get, you know, extra branching and stuff, I don't really cut these flower spikes until they are dead, like brown and dead. So next I'll show you these two sad little ones. This is Oncidium Space Race Chanel and Oncidium Sunny Days Hilo Bay. These guys both have Fusarium. This one I got online, and this one I got from an orchid show, or maybe that was vice versa. But they both had Fusarium. When I repot them, they both had some extra pseudobulbs, which I had to cut right back until I didn't see any more Fusarium. But I did get a refund off the eBay one, and yeah, we'll see how they go. So next we've got Oncidium Shari Baby and Oncidium Heaven Sent. So Shari Baby is, I think, one of the parents of Heaven Sent, and I've done an unboxing with this guy in it a couple of months ago. It's growing well, that new growth. And Shari Baby was in bloom a few months ago, but I kind of repotted this one very poorly. It had a terrible root system, but when I repotted it, I kind of forgot which was the direction of growth. Well, actually there were so many, and so when I repotted it, you can see the growths are in stupid positions. This one's growing into the center here. This one's growing out at the edge. This one is rammed up against the side of the pot. So they're growing, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so lastly in the Oncidium genus, I've got these two. And one is technically not an Oncidium anymore, but I just want to talk about them briefly because it just examples well some of those classification changes. But this one here is just opening up, and I don't have the tag. This is Oncidium Tiger Crow Golden Girl, and it was labelled as Odontocidium. So an Odontocidium is an Odontoglossum crossed with an Oncidium. An Odontoglossum is known to be a cold grower, whereas the Oncidium species like to grow warmer. They need brighter light. They generally tolerate intermediate to warm temperatures, whereas the odontoglossums don't really tolerate warm temperatures at all. So you can see that when you cross them, you might get a range of temperatures, but now they have basically gotten rid of the odontoglossum genus, and most of them have been reclassified as Oncidiums, as cool-growing Oncidiums, which makes their care requirements difficult to figure out, and that's where some of the controversy lies. But anyway, for now, this one is a pure Oncidium tiger crow, no longer an odontoglossum. This is a dancing lady orchid, and this is, or used to be, Oncidium sweet sugar, and she's got yellow flowers, and it is the typical dancing lady. Now, the species of Oncidium that used to give that very typical dancing lady flower look has been reclassified into Gomisa. So the species is called Gomisa now because of the shape of the flower, and whatever came out of its genetic findings. So all those really typical dancing lady looking flowers, the plants are now called Oncidium, a cross between Oncidium and Gomisa. So this is Oncidium sweet sugar now. So next up we've got the Miltoniopsis genus. So a little bit about Miltoniopsis orchids. Historically they were lumped in together with the Miltonia orchids, but actually they are very, very different. They come from different regions, they have different care requirements, and their flowers look completely different as well. So Miltoniopsis orchids are also known as the pansy orchids, and their flowers do actually look like big flat pansies. In terms of care, these guys are cool growers, cool to intermediate growers, and they don't need as much light as the other Oncidiums, but we'll go into care in a little bit more detail later. This is my Miltoniopsis rubenesque charismatic. Oh dear, I'm gonna have to look that one up properly. Anyway, rubenesque is the hybrid name, and it's got 3 buds on each of these spikes here, and I recently discovered another spike developing here. Here is Miltoniopsis breathless beauty, who has a few active growths but no flower spikes that I can see just yet, but these pseudobulbs will plump up very soon. And then lastly I've got Miltoniopsis her Alexander, and I got it earlier this year with 1 pseudobulb division and 1 growth, and I'm always surprised when vendors do this, but anyway, it's grown pretty well. I repotted it, it's grown well, and look, it's flower spike developing there. Okay guys, so what I might do, because this video is going to be too long, is I'm going to talk to you about how I care for my Oncidium alliance orchids, because even though there are variations in care between the genuses, and I have 2 pretty good examples here, the care is still kind of similar. So what I'll do is I'll show you my intergeneric orchids when I do my video about the taxonomy and classification. So we can focus now on how to care for Oncidium orchids, because in truth it's pretty straightforward and pretty easy. There are just considerations when you have particularly the single genera orchids to consider. So when I think about culture for any orchid, I will think about the light, temperature and moisture requirements, and everything else I just adjust to suit those culture needs. So let's talk about light first. So as a blanket rule, Oncidium orchids enjoy intermediate light. So that's somewhere between a Phalaenopsis, but not as bright as the Cattleya. They don't really like a lot in the way of direct sun. They can tolerate a little bit in the morning and a little bit in the afternoon, but bright shade is best. But on that intermediate spectrum, the Oncidium genus and a couple of others, including Brassia, they need light on the brighter end of that intermediate spectrum to bloom. So you can't keep them in poor light because they might not bloom. So if they don't bloom for you 1 year, I would try putting them in a slightly brighter position. Having said that though, they will still all grow well in that bright shade. Now, the Miltoniopsis, on the other hand, prefers light on the lower end of that intermediate spectrum. Some people would call it a low light orchid, and you can see that I've got some flower spikes coming up on these Miltoniopsis, and I pretty much kept them in Phalaenopsis light. So, you know, they're not that fussy in terms of getting bright light, but they will burn very easily in direct sunlight, so I wouldn't be trying to acclimatise them to direct sun by any means. Okay, now let's talk about temperature. So temperature wise, these two are not very close together in terms of their needs. As a general rule for the intergenerics and the other Oncidium types, I would say that Oncidiums like intermediate to warm temperatures. They're pretty easygoing. They can tolerate very easily outside these ranges, especially the intergenerics are very hardy, but the Miltoniopsis and the groups of orchids that were formerly in Odontoglossum and Cochleoda, which have now been reclassified, they are cool growers. They are cool to intermediate. So these Miltoniopsis and Odontoglossums, they're known as the cool growing cloud forest orchids, which sounds delightful, but actually if you can imagine like a forest on a mountain in the clouds, you can imagine it being really humid and damp and really cold, and it really sounds very miserable, but they love it. They will thrive in a temperature range of between 10 to 20 degrees Celsius, and they don't like to go much above 25 degrees Celsius. The Miltoniopsis is a little bit more tolerant of those warm temperatures for short periods of time, but the Odontoglossum don't even contemplate it. They do not do well in warm temperature at all. So unless the Odontoglossum is crossed with a warmer climate Oncidium, it won't tolerate those warm climates. Now that the classification's changed, you know, those rules aren't exactly the same, but that's why people still like to think of Odontoglossums as their own genus. And thirdly is moisture. And moisture, I pretty much treat them all the same. So I don't really fuss about with humidity too much, but in general, all Oncidiums like moisture. So I never let them really dry out. I water all my Oncidiums as they approach dryness, but as a general rule, these cool growing cloud forest orchids, like to stay a little bit more moist, so I would say even evenly moist except for in winter. And I would never really let these guys dry out. The brassicas are probably the ones that don't mind drying out. In fact, in winter they do actually like to dry out a bit between waterings. Alright guys, well I really hope you enjoyed that video, and I hope you found it useful. It's not a comprehensive guide to the Oncidium or anything like that, but really they are such easy orchids and they're really a joy to grow. They are some of the faster growers, you know, it's really rewarding, and I think they're great beginner orchids as well, particularly the intergenerics. But I will do another video about my intergenerics and talk about, you know, the classification and taxonomy and how it's changed in the recent past and what it means for looking after your orchids. I may not do it as the next video, but I will do it sometime in the future. But until then, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Please give my video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs down if you found it really boring and hated it. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos, and I will see you next time. Happy growing until then. Bye.